Good afternoon, this is Xerxes Dowser, and this is the first in a series of videos regarding different meditation techniques and mindfulness. Rather, why are there so many different meditation techniques, and how can one understand this central issue of meditation and the goal of meditation amongst these. I think if you look in YouTube, there's a somewhat famous question, a video of questions students are posing to Iyengar, the yoga instructor who's now deceased. Person asks him something to the effect of, what is the difference between meditation concentrating on breath and meditation that is more contemplative? And his response is something to the effect that when you do yoga poses, you concentrate and you can do meditation while you're doing yoga poses. While that response is not incorrect, I think it's probably not entirely the response or sufficiently complete, or that there's a larger picture in response to that question. I think the Buddhists themselves, particularly the Theravadan Buddhists, answer this question all the time. Or rather, you don't need to search too hard or read too deeply in Theravadan Buddhist literature to come across this question. They often they essentially categorize the way they answer this question. So they categorize meditation into two different categories of concentration meditation and insight meditation. And they also emphasize, while they are two different categories, they are not definitely entirely separate. One reason being is that Buddha had to reach, in his own particular story, as people recount his path to enlightenment, he had reached a certain level of achievement in concentration meditation before reaching enlightenment. However, the Buddha certainly insists that insight meditation is the path which leads to enlightenment. So that's the first part of the answer there, is that the Theravadan Buddhists do indeed respond to this question quite clearly and accurately, and that amounts to, there are two types of meditations. One is concentration meditation, one is insight meditation. Insight meditation will lead to enlightenment, concentration meditation will not. However, a certain amount of concentration meditation is probably necessary in order for reaching enlightenment. Of course, answering this question and talking about reaching enlightenment doesn't really help the everyday person, and it's probably somewhat of a fantastical idea. Still, certainly the Theravadins' texts do articulate this more, and are quite plain and factual and unegotistical, and not necessarily talking about enlightenment and so on and so forth. I think their general angle, and quite rightly so, is that in considering a meditation and a meditation technique, one goes back and looks at the Foundations of Mindfulness Sutra, or the Satipatthana Sutra. They say further that Buddha himself did not really teach any particular meditation technique. Rather, he had two or three sutras which discuss the topic of meditation, of the idea most closely of technique, and that would be the Foundations of Mindfulness, the Satipatthana Sutra. There was some emphasis on the breathing technique, and it's supposedly the technique Buddha used, and that I would dare to speak the word because I mispronounce it, I'm sure, something to Anapanasati Sutra. And then there are some discourses on loving kindness meditations. But in terms of answering the question about the difference between different techniques, one refers to the Satipatthana Sutra. And what does it talk about? Well, here I think, rather than sounding canonical, I try to speak from my own mind, my own words, and starting off by saying I think it is in conformity with the Satipatthana Sutra, and not so far from books such as The Heart of Buddhist Meditation by Nyana Panakathera. The central issue in meditation is acquiring insight, not magical or mystical powers, not superhuman abilities or extra human abilities, but insight. This is no different from anybody living their life, and they might gain some insight. For example, you might say that Franklin D. Roosevelt was a good president because although he comes from he came from a family of presidents, he was in a wheelchair. And I think actually Teddy Roosevelt also was had some health issues, and that perhaps this weakness made him perhaps more understanding of the equality amongst people, or that the elite class is not naturally superior. One has an experience in their life, and then after that they gain some insight. This quest for insight again is not probably so different from parents who, in bringing up their child, seeing how a child learns, probably learns then after that patience with other people, the learning process. I think in both examples I gave, though, one would also say that yes, but this doesn't 100% work. A person can still be a jerk, an elitist can still be an elitist, and so on. But the point is that the human mind, the human being, the human nature has a certain capacity to gain insight. One can argue that the purpose of mindfulness meditation is to harness this activity or focus on this activity and gain as much insight as you can, as deeply as you can, on the human mind. First, really starting off on one's own mind, being the one most closest and of free will to examine. But humans have things in common, and one can also observe the world around them. So how does one do this? First of all, well, that's very simple. This is the very simple sense that I might be sitting there, and I might find myself angry and blow off one's top. That's one thing a person can do. Another thing a person can do is be sitting there getting angry and realize and see and notice and label the fact that before I was feeling calm, all of a sudden my entire body is kind of revved up. And ready to go, and angry. And this is now a state of mind of anger. Now that's the basic process. That phrase is the basic process. of insight meditation. One is observing oneself and making a statement, honest and matter of fact, of what is going on. So then those are the key attributes of mindfulness. Bare attention. Excuse me. In the most simple sense, mindfulness is bare attention. And this is taken right out of Nyanaponika Thera's book, Definition of bare attention, of mindfulness. So bare attention means to say that my state of mind has turned to anger. I have a state of mind of anger. No psychoanalysis, or no lengthy psychoanalysis, other than bare observation of facts. No conversation, no judgment of oneself or judgment of others, and so on. Though this might change you might judge others. You might get angry and then you might judge, but that would be to say the appropriate thing then in mindfulness would be that I see myself judging others, I am judging others. This then becomes the observation, that effect. This is the fundamental nature of insight, and how insight is gained. One's mind with practice can become, in fact concentration practice, will become sharper. One can see things more nuanced, like a slight embarrassing memory before anger. You might catch that one a little bit quicker. Might require some sharper mental observation. But this is the process of deepening insight. I alluded to the place of concentration in this. That is one use of concentration, is to in fact develop a kind of calisthenics for the mind. But one of the main reasons for concentration meditation is the equilibrium, where one, while trying to practice a kind of bare attention, can fall into and indulge. One might say, to see the forest for the trees, one might say, I am angry at this person right now, but one might forget or lose sight of the fact of the bigger picture of the previous events, and one might wallow in the misery of it. This wallowing is then the kind of undesirable outcome. One can say, I am wallowing. One can say it's turned into wallowing. That's always of value. However, as the insight grows, one can seize how maybe wallowing came from disappointment in oneself, following anger at someone else over a general state of mind which seems to be habitual. How do you change this habitual state of mind? With this type of insight, it becomes, the solution to that is to kind of control the path of the mind. And one might say to give the mind something to do. Perhaps one of the reasons the mind indulges in wallow is because the mind is an enormous instrument which can really perceive a lot, be absorbed by a lot, and take in a lot, and has a certain desire or a certain tendency to do so, which can easily mix in with the desire to do so. So often, meditation instruction or meditation instructors have instructed students to give their mind a job, an activity to do in between noticing so to say major events in the mind. That is, to let the major events come rather than to seek them out, to trace them out in some kind of neurotic pattern. What activities do they often suggest? Well, they do often suggest the noticing the breath. They might suggest while observing the body in other sense ways, such as scanning the kind of surface of the skin, putting the mind to the surface of the skin and observing sensations. The reason the breath is often chosen is because it's a neutral subject. Honestly, I think the Buddha did say there are 54 objects appropriate for meditation. Include them, there are many that will lead to sinning, shall we say, or obsessing. One could sit at a strip club, for example, and observe the form of the opposite sex and observe the reactions of the body. However, I think the Buddhists might argue that for an untrained mind, it's easy to fall from doing mindfulness to just indulging wildly. The breath is chosen because it's an intimate thing to observe, while neutral. While the breath can be pleasurable, it is not. You don't fall into kind of an addiction for it or an obsession over it. It being intimate, it is intimately related to your mood, your stress, your happiness. It can also bring happiness and good health. Being able to develop some degree to calm oneself according to the breath, obviously, is obvious. Physical benefits. So those are the two major issues. One is insight. Second is controlling and keeping the mind on bare attention rather than indulging. And the third thing is less important, is the idea of developing kind of calisthenics of the mind, for the mind to be able to essentially see more subtle sensations in the body, for the mind to be able to stay in one place longer. One may not have to make a point of doing calisthenics to strengthen these things. As soon as one chooses to do the two previous, give your mind a job, and when significant elements arise, observing them with bare attention, these are the calisthenics in themselves. The point is to probably appreciate the consequence of the concentration, and to consider the positive aspect, to be able to focus in deeper and to focus in longer. And I suppose the final quality of concentration meditation also is the ability to break habits, to resist from, in a sense, a state of mind or a habitual thought process. Well, habitual is a habit. One has a compulsion to do so. Like breaking any habit, there's kind of two aspects to it. One is to realize what you're doing, and the second thing is to resist doing it. And again, we see the two elements. In this case, we see the two elements in play: insight and discipline, shall we say, the disciplinary aspect of concentration, where you are resisting from falling into what you've now come to understand as a habit. And thank you. That concludes this video.